Happy Victory Monday, Steelers Nation. I'm your host, Jack Sperry, and today on Steelers Talk for our first video here on this Victory Monday, we're going to be talking about 5 big questions that still loom over this Pittsburgh Steelers team after their big-time win versus the Baltimore Ravens on the road in Week 14 to take back control in the AFC North. Now, before we get into these big questions and whether or not the Pittsburgh Steelers are going to answer these questions down the stretch, give me a follow on X if you haven't already, at Jack_Sperry. I am going to be putting out my film analysis and my film clips and my thoughts on all the various things on offense and defense all throughout the day on that platform. Unfortunately, we can't put NFL clips here on YouTube without getting demonetized, but I can put those clips on social media, and you guys can enjoy that content there. So if you guys want to follow me on X, at Jack_Sperry, that's where you guys can get my film analysis. I will have my film takeaways on this show later in the evening, but if you want to see the actual video evidence and the actual examples, you guys can give me a follow at Jack_Sperry for daily and free Steelers content, as well as film analysis every single week. So we'll start off here with our first question, which I think is probably the biggest question heading into future weeks here, which is how much longer is Derek Harmon going to be out of the lineup, and will the Pittsburgh Steelers potentially bring in a free agent run stuffer if he's going to end up missing more time? Because plain and simply, guys, this run defense cannot survive without Derek Harmon in the lineup. I mean, you can just look at the numbers. Now we have a pretty decent sample size. We have about a month of football games, 4 games this year without Derek Harmon, and in those 4 games, you're giving up almost 200 rush yards per game, and you're giving up nearly 6 rush yards per rush. I mean, that's just an insane average, and you guys can see how it changes when Derek Harmon is in the lineup. They give up less than 100 yards per game when Harmon is in there. Of course, Harmon's a big boy. He's like 310 pounds. He plays with excellent technique. As a rookie, he has made an incredible impact on this defensive line and on this rushing defense, and without him in the lineup, this Pittsburgh Steelers defense really crumbles against opposing run games. And if you want to see another kind of crazy stat here for the Pittsburgh Steelers run defense, with Derek Harmon in 9 games this year, they've allowed 864 total rush yards this season. All right, without Derek Harmon in just 4 games, they only have 100 less rush yards allowed. So in 5 less games, they only have 100 less rush yards allowed total. That is absolutely insane, and just shows you how much worse this Steelers run defense is when Derek Harmon is not out there on the field. Now, in terms of fixing the issue, hopefully Derek Harmon can just get back this week and he's good for the rest of the season. But we don't know what the status is on his injury. All we kind of know is that he was able to finish the game, against the Chicago Bears a couple weeks ago, and then he got his knee checked like on Monday, and it turned out to be something more serious, and he's missed the last 2 games. We haven't really gotten a hard timeline for his return. Hopefully tomorrow on Tomlin Tuesday, Coach T just takes the podium and says, yeah, we're getting Derek Harmon back this week, and hopefully that would fix a lot of the issues in the run defense for the Pittsburgh Steelers right now, because it is the biggest issue on defense for the Pittsburgh Steelers right now, and it's not even close. But if not, I think Pittsburgh does need to get more help in run defense, especially on the defensive line, because without Harmon there to kind of hold the line of scrimmage, prevent these kind of big gaping holes in the middle of the Steelers defense, because plain and simply, guys, Keanu Benton is just getting driven backwards very, very consistently. And, even a Y.A. Black, who actually had more snaps yesterday than defensive captain Cam Hayward, Black usually runs out of gas in the second half, all right? I don't think Y.A. necessarily has the stamina to play a full starter's workload at this point in his NFL career. And with Harmon out of the lineup, they're kind of asking him to play that kind of role, and he kind of runs out of gas in that second half, and that's why we're seeing Derrick Henry and James Cook having the success that we've seen them have in the second half these past 2 weeks. But then even the guys in the second wave there with Zesi Otomiwu, and then you got Logan Lee, I just don't know if this defensive line without Derek Harmon can really survive in run defense, and I think the numbers bear that out. So if they want to go out and get some help on the defensive line, these would probably be the top 5 guys with a lot of experience in the National Football League that you could consider. Christian Wilkins is probably the big name out there. Armon Watson, Montravius Adams, 2 guys that have played for the Steelers before. Linval Joseph, a longtime veteran nose tackle, like 330 pounds if you just want a stopgap in the middle of this defense. And then Deshaun Williams, a veteran that has played a lot of football in the National Football League, is also still available. But the big name for sure on that list is Christian Wilkins, and I know that Wilkins' name will probably be brought up a lot on Steelers Twitter this week, and frankly for good reason. Wilkins is a really good player when he's healthy and out there on the field, and he is still available on the free agency market. He is about to turn 30 years old. He's a couple days away from his birthday. He's 310 pounds, just like Derek Harmon is, but he was the 13th overall pick in the NFL draft. Back in 2019, he famously gave that jumping hug to Commissioner Roger Goodell in a really cool draft moment there. But he hasn't been signed by an NFL team since he was released by the Las Vegas Raiders back in July. I know he's disputing, some money that he believes that the Vegas Raiders still owe him by releasing him at that point. But pretty much the Raiders avoided some of the money on his contract because they felt like he didn't meet the standards of his contract. He's currently fighting the organization for that additional money, and he hasn't signed with a team since that moment. And you guys can take a look here at his career stats, and he's always been a very disruptive player. I mean, that 2023 season where he put up 9 sacks as a defensive tackle, that is an insane season, but he's always been a very disruptive player in the middle. He's always been a pretty good run defender as well. So, this is definitely the most talented player at this position that is still available, and it's not particularly close. But the thing is, if Wilkins is ready and willing to play football right now, the question is, why hasn't a team been willing to sign him? I'm sure there's a lot of teams that could use defensive tackle help, and some of those teams are probably in even better position to compete in the playoffs than the Pittsburgh Steelers are. I know the Buffalo Bills have been linked to him. I know the Philadelphia Eagles fans have been wanting to go sign him as well. Like, there's been a lot of teams that have been wanting to go get Christian Wilkins for down the stretch, but nobody even brought him in before training camp this year or at any point during this season. So I wonder, does he even want to play? And number 2, is he healthy enough to play? I know he was dealing with an injury, and that was a big reason why the Raiders ended up cutting him, is because he wouldn't get another surgery on it. So is he really good to go? I'm just not sure on that. And then even if he does want to play, is Pittsburgh really the destination he wants to go to? I mean, does he really think that if he comes to Pittsburgh that this is going to be like a Super Bowl caliber team? Or, I just don't know if that's going to be, the way that he thinks about this football team at this point in time. So honestly, I'm not sure how realistic a Christian Wilkins signing is. I would be thrilled if the Steelers were able to pull it off. I just don't know how realistic it is at this juncture in the 2025 NFL season. Maybe some more realistic options here are 2 guys that have played for the Steelers before. In recent seasons, Montravius Adams was a longtime starter at nose tackle for this Steelers team. Obviously, he's older now, and he's been away from the organization for a little bit, but he's bounced around the league, including coming back for another short stint with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Could certainly bring him back. Somebody that obviously knows the terminology and can come right in and understand, the language here in Pittsburgh on a defensive perspective. And if you want to bring in Armon Watts, he's somebody that at defensive end in this defense played really, really well 2 seasons ago. And, he got a pretty decent contract from New England last year because of it. So, those 2 guys are still available on the free agency market. Would certainly consider bringing either one of those guys in. I would also think about Linval Joseph, just because he's got so much experience in this league and as a 330-pound, veteran, that can just stand in the middle of the defensive line and not really be asked to do much more than that, especially on early downs. I think he's still more than capable of doing that. He's got the size, he's got the mass, he's got, that brute man strength that you want out of your nose tackle that, frankly, Keanu Benton just doesn't have at nose tackle for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Joseph can certainly take on double teams without, without losing that line of scrimmage kind of integrity that we've seen from Keanu Benton at nose tackle all season long. So any of those options I would be perfectly fine with if the Pittsburgh Steelers brought them in this week. And, but I will say this, guys. just talking about the defense in general, I do see the light at the end of the tunnel here. Because once Derek Harmon gets back and once this run game can kind of get back to normal and you're giving up less than 100 rush yards per game, the passing defense is actually playing very well. I mean, Joey Porter Jr. and James Pierre have been really good in coverage. Brandon Echols has played really well in the slot. Jalen Ramsey is playing well at safety right now, and eventually you're going to get Kyle Duggar back as well. So this passing defense in this secondary has really turned a new leaf over the last several weeks. So once you get that front figured out, and once you figure out this run defense, I really think that this Steelers defense is set up to play its best football of the season when it matters most here in December and hopefully in January as well. So what say you guys? Let me know down there in the comments section. What is the confidence level in this defense once Derek Harmon gets back in the lineup? Put it on a scale of 1, meaning this is the worst defense in the National Football League, to 10, meaning this is the best defense in the National Football League once Derek Harmon gets back. In just a second here, I'm going to tell you about our sponsor today at Harry's. So this is going to be the pinned comment on today's show. So while I tell you about our sponsor today, simply give me a number between 1 and 10. And with that, let's have a word from our sponsor today at Harry's. And I don't have to tell you guys that maneuvering the men's razor space nowadays is a bit of a nightmare. The quality products are always super expensive, and refills are always ridiculously expensive as well. Then when you try and save a little bit of money, you get stuck with dull razors that irritate your skin. That's exactly why I switched to Harry's Plus, and I haven't looked back since. Harry's Plus has an advanced pivoting system to reach every corner of your face, refined blade tech for a closer, smoother shave, and a weighted metal handle, which is Harry's heaviest handle ever for added control and comfort. But I think the best part about Harry's Plus is how affordable it is. Harry's owns their own world-class blade factory in Germany, which means no outsourcing and no middlemen. And because they control the entire process from steel to shelf, they keep costs low and pass the savings on to you, the customer. And even after all this innovation that they've put into this new product, Harry's Plus still costs less than Gillette Fusion. And to put a bow on it all, if you don't love your shave, Harry's will make it right with you, no questions asked. Their risk-free trial means there's zero downside to giving them a shot. And just to show you guys that I actually use and love this product, I have my Harry's Plus razor, I should say, with me right here. And the reason why I love this, guys, is really the weighted metal handle. You can certainly go with some of their plastic products that they have in the Harry's line as well, but I really like the weighted metal handle because it gives you that extra little weight, which gives you that little extra premium feel and that extra control, in the bathroom when you're shaving every single morning. And what I love about Harry's products, guys, why I've been using them since college and why we're so excited to be partnering with them here on Steelers Talk is because of how affordable it is while still getting that German-engineered barbershop quality shave every single time. So for a limited time only, our listeners can get Harry's Plus, a trial set here for only $10 at harrys.com/chat. This set includes the all-new Harry's Plus razor, one refined 5-blade cartridge, a 2-ounce foaming shave gel, and a travel cover to protect your blades on the go. Just head on over to harrys.com/chat to claim this offer, and after your purchase, they'll ask where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them that we sent you. A big thank you to Harry's for sponsoring today's edition of Steelers Talk. Second question on today's show here is, are we going to get that version of Aaron Rodgers consistently down the stretch? Because really during the last 2 months before this last game, Aaron Rodgers was not playing at a high level. In fact, he was probably one of the bottom 3, at best, bottom 5 starting quarterbacks in the National Football League over the last 2 months. But yesterday, man, he played like a legitimate, borderline top 10 quarterback yesterday, right? He was throwing the ball down the field, had multiple downfield shots, good completion percentage while pushing the ball down the field. He made some really good reads to get some really easy completions, but for big gains, like that big touchdown in the third quarter to Jalen Warren, read that defense, saw that the defense was outflanked and got that ball to Jalen Warren for an easy touchdown there. Got to 284 yards passing, had 2 touchdowns, a passing one and a rushing one, had no picks, protected the football well, and had a passer rating over 100 for the first time in a little while here. So, Rodgers certainly played his best game, I would say, probably since the Cincinnati game, all the way back in Week 7. If we get that version of Rodgers, that'll mean good things for the Pittsburgh Steelers moving forward. Mark Caboli pointed out yesterday during the game, actually, how many downfield completions that Aaron Rodgers was getting. He had a 52, 41, 38, 31, 28, and a 21-yard completion yesterday. So lots of splash from the Pittsburgh Steelers passing attack, especially in those first three quarters. He did taper off in the fourth quarter. I think he only had like 4 passing yards in the fourth quarter yesterday. So I know you're trying to chew clock and all that different stuff, but it just wasn't as smooth in the fourth quarter as it was in the first 3 quarters for Aaron Rodgers. But listen, man, it was his best game that he has had since Week 7. If that's the version of Aaron Rodgers we are getting down the stretch, the Pittsburgh Steelers can beat any team in the National Football League, especially if they get Harmon back like we talked about earlier. They can get this run defense under control. If Aaron Rodgers is playing like that, he's throwing the ball down the field as efficiently and as accurately as he was yesterday. We're talking about a quarterback that can win playoff games for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But, that's a big question mark at this point is at 42 years old, are we going to get the version of Rodgers that we've seen, by and large the last 2 months, or are we going to see the version of Rodgers that we saw yesterday in a big-time game on the road versus the Baltimore Ravens? I think that's going to be a big question mark that he's going to have to answer down the stretch here for the Steelers offense. Then sticking with the offense here, number 3 question on today's show. Is will really anyone in this wide receiver room legitimately step up as the number 2 receiving option in the Pittsburgh Steelers offense next to DK Metcalf, specifically at wide receiver? Because yesterday it was the DK Metcalf show, and that's absolutely a good thing, right? You want to get the ball to DK Metcalf. I think he had like 12 targets yesterday. Aaron was definitely doing a good job prioritizing getting the ball to his best player, the $30 million man, getting 148 yards on the day. That was more than everybody else. That includes running backs, tight ends, and wide receivers in the Steelers offense. And even then, the rest of the crew getting 145 yards, that's actually not terrible. Like I said, there was a lot of explosive plays, and not every single one of them went to DK Metcalf. But I don't think we can necessarily bank on this from a week-to-week perspective, right? We've seen all season that DK will go off every once in a while and get over 100 yards, but he'll also have his games where he gets double-teamed, and, you're going to have somebody step up because DK did get more one-on-one opportunities yesterday than what we've been accustomed to seeing from him. So somebody other than DK is probably going to have to step up into that legitimate number 2 wide receiver role. And, we saw Calvin have a nice 31-yard completion yesterday on a go route. Adam Thielen, as he gets more accustomed to life here in Pittsburgh, you're hoping that he can step into that number 2 role. He had number 2 wide receiver snaps yesterday. He had 25 snaps yesterday for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Marquez Valdes-Scantling had only 1 target yesterday, but he's certainly somebody that's in contention there. And then, some other guys that are still technically in the rotation here are Skoranek, Scotty Miller, and Roman Wilson. And maybe Roman can get back in there. We'll talk about him here in just a second. But I'm really hoping, I think the best chance for somebody to legitimately step up here down the stretch is probably Adam Thielen. I think as he gets more acclimated to life here in Pittsburgh and he continues to build that chemistry with Aaron Rodgers down the stretch, I think we're going to see more targets and more completions from Thielen, who is still a crafty route runner, still has good hands, all that different stuff, can run those option routes on third downs. And he's a guy that Rodgers can trust to make that correct decision on those option routes. And I'm hoping Thielen can get a little bit more. We can get a little bit more from him in the weeks to come because, 1 catch for 4 yards is usually not going to cut it if the Steelers want to win against playoff caliber teams. But my 4th question on today's show is, will Roman Wilson get his helmet back over Scotty Miller at some point this season? And, it's really disappointing, in my opinion, that this coaching staff decided to essentially sit down, a second-year player that was a former third-round pick that honestly has been showing a decent amount of promise this year. Now, that's not to say Roman has been lighting it up or that he's been adequate enough to earn that number 2 wide receiver moniker this year or moving forward. But Scotty Miller is somebody that should be a non-factor and has been a non-factor in this offense all season long. He barely has any targets, barely any yards, barely any receptions this year, and he's getting a helmet over Roman Wilson. Like, are you kidding me? Roman's been somebody that's gotten open down the field. He's stacked corners on go routes this year multiple times over this last month. It's just that the quarterbacks haven't been able to hit him. And, in terms of the intermediate stuff, he can still run crossers, and, he's got some snappy routes as well. Does he run routes the way Rodgers necessarily wants him to and runs them like a true veteran? No. And I think that probably really bugs Aaron Rodgers. And at this point in the season, with just 4 games left to go, I don't know if he's going to get that helmet back. But, it's just really tough for Roman Wilson because he's just probably not doing the things that Rodgers and Art want him to do in terms of running the routes the way that they want him to, based on how the coverage is playing him. He probably doesn't run the option routes the correct ways and all those different things, and that's unfortunate. And this was something that we saw last year, right? Roman Wilson would get injured, then he would be back, quote-unquote, healthy, and then he'd be a healthy scratch, and we'd be left kind of scratching our heads as to why Roman Wilson isn't playing and why he's not getting opportunities, but it's probably because he's just not doing the right things in practice, and he's not doing the right things in games in terms of running these routes in the ways that the coaching staff and the way that the quarterback expects them to be run. And that's unfortunate because I do think Roman has a good bit of talent, and I'm hoping that he can turn it around. And I just hope he gets another chance. I really do, because Scotty Miller has no chance of being an impact player for this team and a contributor to this offense down the not only down the stretch but also in future seasons. As a former third-round pick and a pretty talented guy, Roman Wilson does still have that opportunity. So if I'm the Steelers coaching staff, I'm not giving Scotty Miller a helmet next week. I'm giving that helmet to Roman Wilson. And listen, man, if it's a reduced role for him, fine. But, give him a helmet, all right? Because just taking him off the field and putting him on the bench just ruins his confidence entirely. And I just think that, if there's an injury or something, I would rather have Roman Wilson out there than someone like Scotty Miller. So that's where I'm at with the situation here, guys. But predict it for me down there in the comments section. Does Roman Wilson make another meaningful catch for the Pittsburgh Steelers this season? Simply give me a yes or a no down there in the comments section. Yes if you think he gets another chance. No if you think his season is essentially over. Then the final question I want to talk about on today's show, guys, once again, centering around the offense, which is, will the Pittsburgh Steelers run game get going again? Because over the last 2 weeks, it has not been particularly great. All right, they only have 90 total rush yards from their running back duo the last 2 weeks, and Jaylen Warren and Kenny Gainwell, and they're averaging really low numbers in that regard as well. But just 2 weeks ago, they combined for 160 yards in just one game versus the Chicago Bears, and what was one of the high points of this season in terms of the run game. Now, I do think a part of it is just a lack of actually committing to the run game the last 2 weeks. The last 2 weeks, they've really gone heavy passing attack here with Aaron Rodgers, and whereas in Week 12 with Mason Rudolph at quarterback, they ran the ball 28 times versus the Chicago Bears in just that one game. They've only ran the ball 27 times with Kenny Gainwell and Jaylen Warren. In the last 2 games. So, they're just passing the ball way more, and I don't think that's the way that this team should be operating on offense. I mean, let's face it, guys. This offense isn't built to be a pass-heavy group. Now, if they had, a legitimate number 2 receiver, if they actually utilized Pat Freiermuth in the ways that they should be using him, all those different things, if Darnell Washington was healthy, then absolutely be a pass-heavy offense. Great. All right? Aaron Rodgers is a smart quarterback. He can do the quick game stuff. That's certainly in his bag. But, and as long as Aaron Rodgers keeps throwing the ball down the field as efficiently as he did yesterday, by all means, be a pass-heavy team. I just don't know how sustainable that is, and I think that the most sustainable aspect of this Steelers offense is that run game with Jaylen Warren and Kenny Gainwell, and when you don't prioritize that, I just don't know how sustainable the heavy passing attack is here in Pittsburgh with really the lack of dynamic receiving talent that we have here in Pittsburgh this year. So I think that the run game needs to get going again, and I think they need to make that a priority down the stretch, because I think that gives the Pittsburgh Steelers offense the best chance at success once we potentially get into the NFL postseason this year. Now, later today, guys, I will have my film takeaways from Steelers versus Ravens here on the channel. I'll have my compiled list of offensive and defensive takeaways. So if you guys want to know what the film says about yesterday's win versus the Baltimore Ravens, make sure you guys click that subscribe button. Join us here on Steelers Talk, and also turn on those notifications if you haven't already so you know when that video comes out, because we go really in-depth on these film breakdown videos, guys. Some of the best content we make here on Steelers Talk, so I don't don't want you guys to miss it. But again, make sure you click that subscribe button if you haven't already to never miss any of our free content that we have for you guys right here on Steelers Talk. And until later today, guys, here we go, Steelers.